Hello, my name is Vincent He, and I am a Hmong anthropologist. I'm standing inside the Hmong American Friendship Association. Here there is a small museum. I will let you glimpse this museum in a few minutes, but first, let me tell you a little bit about my people in history. The Hmong came from Asia. Your teacher showed you the countries they lived in before many came to the United States: China, Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand. Not too many outside people knew much about the Hmong. This is because researchers did not begin to study the Hmong in China until the early 1900s and the Hmong in Southeast Asia in the 1950s. An American researcher and a French missionary helped the Hmong of Laos to establish a writing system. This important work was completed only in 1954. This means that the Hmong had a language, but they did not have a writing until about a half century ago. At that time, only very few Hmong had the chance to go to school, to learn to read and write in their own language. Because they couldn't write down their history, they started to worry that they might forget some things or that other people wouldn't know about them. So it happened that just before many Hmong began coming to the United States, they started to tell the story of their culture and their history with something called story cloths. Hmong women would sew little figures of plants and animals and people on these cloths. And when all of this was put together, the cloth would tell a story. There are two things to know about the Hmong before many came to the United States. First, they led very simple lives by choice. Second, other cultural groups often caused problems for the Hmong, sometimes just because the Hmong wanted to keep their own culture. Now, as long as anyone knows, the Hmong live in the mountain regions of China and Southeast Asia. The Hmong were farmers. They grew their own food, including rice, corn, and vegetables. Everyone in the family, including children, helped with the work in the fields. The Hmong have a religion. The founder of the religion is a person by the name of Shi. Shi was a kind, compassionate, and knowledgeable healer. He devoted his life to helping those who are sick and dying. He performed special ceremonies to try to cure them. His work was very important in that he gave people hope and strength. Many Hmong traditions today are thought to be based on the ideas of Shi. Some Hmong men and women have taken on the role that Shi himself played a long time ago. Hmong call these people Zineng. Americans refer to them as shamans. Many Hmong Americans became Christians, but like the Irish, the Hmong combined many of their older beliefs and practices with their new Christian religion. The Hmong in Laos had their own very simple form of government. They lived in the same areas as all their relatives, and this large group of relatives was called a clan. The clans would have older people they trust as leaders. The leaders would then serve as judges in case people had problems or got into arguments or wanted good advice. In the mountain villages, the Hmong did not always have plows, tractors, or machines to make their life easier. They built their own homes made of wood, bamboo, and thatch. Their life back then was very different from what we see today in America. When the Hmong had to travel, they walked or rode horses. So did their children. Many Hmong had special skills. Some men could make their own guns out of scraps of metal and use these to hunt. Other men make beautiful silver jewelry. They made the jewelry all by hand. The women never had sewing machines, but they made beautiful clothing and all kinds of pretty cloths for their homes. They could then wear the clothes when they had festivals, especially the New Year. During the New Year, people come together to celebrate. At this celebration, young men and women also had a chance to get to know each other. One of the activities in which young adults take part in is ball. This is a ball tossing game where people sing and chant poetry to each other. Often, many young adults will get married after the New Year celebration. When the other people living in these Asian countries began to have things like electricity, running water, large fancy houses, cars, telephones, and televisions, the Hmong in the mountains were not able to have these things. Their lives were based on what they had. Their culture was based on how they lived. Because of these differences, other groups often did not like the Hmong. They wanted the Hmong to be more like them. The Hmong live in the area we call China today, but that was long before the Chinese were there. But the Chinese became very strong and started to move into the Hmong areas. They began to take away their land and try to force them to give up their traditions and become like the Chinese. The Hmong did make many changes to their culture, but they were not always willing to give up everything they had. They were so badly treated by some Chinese leaders. A lot of Hmong left China and went to Laos, a country next door to China. Things were a little better for them there, but sometimes other countries took over Laos, and these other countries would force the Hmong to plant different crops or try and force them to have different leaders. Beginning in 1957, a country next door to Laos had a war. This was known as the Vietnam War. The United States supported South Vietnam, and other countries supported North Vietnam. Pretty soon the war spread to Laos, and the Hmong had to take side. They decided they would be better off supporting the Americans in South Vietnam. During the war, they helped the Americans in many ways, as soldiers, as war leaders, as people who gave the Americans information. And they even went out and rescued American pilots whose planes had crashed. Thousands and thousands of Hmong died in the war supporting the Americans. But by 1975, the war was over, and the other side, North Vietnam, had won. In Laos, the Hmong were hunted down because they worked for the Americans. Many thousands more were killed. Some Hmong tried desperately to escape. About 100,000 were able to run away and cross a river to get to Thailand, another country next door to Laos. It was this experience that the Hmong remember so well, because as they ran away, so many of their family members were killed right in front of them. Those that got across the river went into refugee camps in Thailand. There, they feel safer. It was in these camps that the Hmong decided to tell their stories. But because almost none of them could write, they began telling their stories with story cloths. While they were in the camps, the United States government decided that because the Hmong had helped them in the war, they would bring many of these Hmong to the United States. This started in 1976, the year after the war ended. It took the United States over 10 years to bring many of them over. This is how the Hmong came to this country. A lot of Hmong ended up coming to Wisconsin and Minnesota. Many of their clans settled here in Milwaukee. Coming to Milwaukee was very hard. Probably no other cultural group coming here ever had to adjust to as many changes as did the Hmong. A lot of well-intended people in Milwaukee, like church groups, agreed to help the Hmong make many adjustments. But most of these groups did not know anything about the Hmong. They could not speak Hmong, and the Hmong could not speak English. That was the most difficult adjustment. The first group of Hmong came to Milwaukee during the winter of 1976. One of the things they had to adjust to was snow. Another was food. Back in Laos, they ate mainly rice and vegetables. Now, many of the earliest Hmong that came to Milwaukee described the food they were given by the church groups. Some described food like peanut butter, jelly, and bread. And there was all this technology that they had never seen before. They had to learn how to use electricity, gas stoves, washing machines, toilets, running water, even computers. They also had to get from place to place and had to learn about buses, cars, planes, and trains. In Milwaukee, they could not live the way they once did. But believe it or not, the Hmong did adjust. Many young Hmong Americans are getting good educations, including going to college. And the good news is that they have made all of these adjustments without having to give up their own culture and traditions. In a moment, we'll hear what the people learned to do in Milwaukee and their great contributions to the city. But first, let's return to your instructor and work on the questions set up for you.
Some Hmong scholars debate over the origin of the word Hmong, but most maintain that the word carries a connotation of freedom. Early Hmong linguistic scholar and Catholic priest Yves Bertré claims that the word had a connotation of free people, or those who must have their freedom and independence. It has been in this spirit that the Hmong have resisted the patterns often observed among other immigrant groups, that of acculturalization and assimilation. The amazing feature of the Hmong adaptation to American life is that they have not surrendered their own cultural practices. How have these been maintained? First, like many U.S. ethnic groups, the Hmong keep track of happenings in their previous homelands.
Within the radio program, we try to get information from the country that have the Hmong people live in, especially in Laos, Thailand, China, and some other country. And that way we can bring what happened over there in everyday's life over here in America here. And that way people living here, they know and kind of get connection with people over there, knowing what they do every day and what happened every day.
Second, language preservation is a high priority. Virtually every Hmong family the anthropologists interviewed in Milwaukee discussed ways they maintain the Hmong language at home.
A lot of time right now what we try to do is that we try to educate our kids earlier so that way they can learn how to speak the Hmong language. For example, I have 2 kids, and at home we speak Hmong, because that way they can be fluent in Hmong, and when they get to be 5 to 6 years old, then they can learn how to speak English. That way their Hmong is more fluent.
Third, the clans and collective life remain central to Hmong social life. When the Hmong were initially settled in America, the U.S. government made attempts to disperse them widely among the 50 states so that no single locality would be overburdened with social service needs. But as soon as the Hmong adapted well enough to function on their own, they engaged in a secondary migration and reunited their clans. Today, the clans continue to play important roles in regulating marriage and other functions.
These clan leaders play very key roles in how the society is shaped and formed and how decisions are made. It comes down to critical things such as, does a couple stay married or divorce? It even goes to the simple things of how many children they're going to have in the family. And so clan leaders play very intricate roles in negotiating marriages, divorces, and any liens or any disputes within the community itself.
Within the whole Hmong populations, we have only 18 last names. And no matter where you live, people who have the same last name never get married to each other. They always consider each other's brothers and sisters, and always consider them part of the families, even though they are very remotely related back in maybe even a couple generations, but still considered, part of the family, never get married each other. And so that's one thing that keeps the Hmong all tied together and very family oriented. And that's why in this country too, you will see a lot of Hmong tend to gather in cities or in states that are populated because of that clan structure that the Hmong tend to pull each other to be together so that they can help each other out.
Well, in the Hmong culture, there are 3 methods of marriage. There is marriage by capture, which is where the groom captures the bride and takes her as his wife. There is marriage called the runaway marriage, which is where the bride chooses to run away with the groom. And then there's marriage by mediation. And for my wedding, I chose to have a marriage by mediation because it honors and brings respect to the family. And it especially honored my parents for upbringing me and then also honoring me as a woman.
Fourth, many Hmong rituals of long standing are alive and well in Milwaukee. These include spiritual and healing practices, plus the Hmong New Year.
because in Laos there's a lack of hospitals or medicine. Many of our elders, most of our elders, they have a good knowledge of herbal medicines that we use in Laos. My grandma and my mom, they're very knowledgeable about herbal medicines, and sometimes when we're not feeling well, they always tell us what's good for us and what's not good as an alternative to Western medicine.
Hmong people celebrate New Year, and that would be after the harvest season where they have plenty of food to celebrate. And what they do is that they have a maypole, kind of like a pole in the middle, and they would tie a string to it. And then they would sacrifice a chicken, and then everybody kind of walk through the maypole. And it's kind of like Hawthorne's, one of Hawthorne's novel, The Maypole, and where people walk in, and then it just kind of a renewal of a new year, and then they would kill the chicken and then sacrifice the chicken. Everybody kind of walk around the maypole, and it's a symbol of New Year.
Lastly, even the horticultural practices are still maintained in this city. Hmong are able to keep their culinary preferences via urban gardening.
Even today around Milwaukee City, through UW Extension, through city and county land, a lot of Hmong family, including myself, we still holding on to the tradition of have our own fresh vegetables, such as do our own garden and do our own planting for the fresh vegetable that we need for diet, for everyday diet.
Through the process of adapting to American culture and still retaining their own practices, the Hmong have made important contributions to the wider society. One of these contributions that emerged very early was the Hmong farmers' markets. Another early contribution was the Hmong propensity to stabilize central city neighborhoods.
There were a lot of boarded up houses in the downtown area. So many of us start buying those houses, and then we fix. We do a lot of work, and then we fix those houses so we can have a place for our family. It is our belief, and back then and still now, that as a man, you have to have a roof to cover your families. And then I think that that is a strong belief in our culture. And then to think about it, the verb rent never exists in our culture. Not only that those houses will help our family, will provide a place for our family to live, but I think that we did some good thing for the city of Milwaukee by holding on to those houses so they did not get tear down.
The Hmong left their sponsors early and developed their own self-supporting organizations and programs. In Milwaukee, they have their own newspapers, educational organizations, women's associations, arts and crafts clubs, a Hmong museum, their own food markets, youth programs, family services, and student associations. The Hmong have begun to have an impact on commerce.
When Hmong families began to move into Milwaukee during the early 80s, there are very few people that get a good jobs. There are very few people that buying homes due to lack of financial. But over the years, there are more and more nonprofit organizations that are established, and there are more and more business that are established to help provide resources to the Hmong families so that they can become a better citizen in this community. For example, that the Global Staffing Resources is an employment agency that I established back in '95. We had helped many Hmong families to obtain full-time employment and become economically self-sufficient.
And through education, the Hmong have advanced socially and economically in nearly every field they've entered.
Hmong parents do everything they can to save money so that they can support their children into a higher education. There is a group called the Hmong American Peace Academy, and that is going to be the first Hmong public school in the state of Wisconsin and the second school in the nation. And we are, established this institution to help Hmong parents and Hmong children to better our educational system in our own communities.
Right now, around the nations in the U.S. here, the Hmong probably have close to about 200 doctors in all different fields with a PhD in a number, and probably about triple of that numbers have a master's degree, and many thousands are with the bachelor's degrees and so forth.
This was the story of the Hmong who settled in the Midwestern city of Milwaukee. Perhaps no cultural group worldwide was less prepared for life in post-industrial metropolis than these Hmong. They came from a mountain home in Laos where they practiced slash and burn farming, had almost no access to high technology and formal education, were organized in complex clan systems, revered their ancestors, and had their own non-Western healing practices. They came to America on the heels of collective lives decimated by the secret war in Laos and years in refugee camps. Within one generation, these Hmong have adapted to urban American life, making major contributions in education, stabilizing neighborhoods, and the development of programs, organizations, and businesses. The amazing part of their adaptive process was that the Hmong continue to find their place in mainstream urban America without sacrificing the core of their cultural practices. By retaining many of their practices, they add another contribution, that of enriching the cultural landscape of one Midwestern city.